So what you're going to see is right about here, you're going to stop pulling that right shoulder behind your head. And we're going to call this club parallel to the ground. So I'm going to take Tiger up to that same point. And what you're going to see is when his club's parallel to the ground, his chest is rotated a lot more. So if I draw another line here, I'll just kind of imagine this is a line 90 degrees from his chest. That's kind of about where his chest is pointing, and your chest is kind of over here. So in other words, this line, this is the center of your chest, so imagine a line coming out from your sternum, your chest, 90 degrees out from your chest. Your hands have gotten a little bit behind you, whereas Tiger's hands are still basically dead center in front of his chest. So all this is showing is that you're starting to swing your arms faster than you're turning your body. And of course, we know what this leads to. Your arms get stuck at the, behind you. And so what you're going to find is that as we progress through the swing, this is going to continue on. Your arms are going to continue to swing behind your body, and so then you're going to get stuck. And that's why you end up coming a little bit too far from the inside and a little bit below the plane. So what you're going to see here is, and notice also that Tiger's right shoulder is almost completely gone. You can just barely see his right shoulder here, and he's got pretty big shoulders, so this is pretty indicative of he's really pulling that right shoulder behind his head, whereas you're starting to push that left arm across your body. And this is a great way to think of it, is when your hands are behind your sternum here. As you continue to go on, now that head's starting to move to the right a little bit, and it's not a ton, but it is enough for a better player that's indicative of a pushing motion from that left side. If we look at Tiger, it's almost as if his head is somebody's holding it, because he's creating centripetal force. He's creating rotation by pulling, and there's no pushing from that left side here. He's simply pulling that right side, his back muscles in his right side and his shoulder girdle behind his head. And that's why you can see he's made this massive shoulder turn, because his goal in the golf swing is not to swing his arms and hands into position. His goal, if you want to turn your back, or create 90 degrees rotation, get your back to the target, his goal is to turn his back. And that's exactly what you can see Tiger doing here. He's made a massive shoulder turn, and his arms really, in comparison, haven't moved nearly as much as yours have. They've moved in a very controlled space in front of his body, rather than taking them right off the ball and swinging them behind his chest, where this line was showing you earlier. So at the top, he's made a much more powerful turn and stayed more centered, whereas yours, because you've pushed a little bit from the left, you've had to move a little bit. It's a small amount, but when we look at the down the line view, you're going to see that your arms are going to get trapped behind your body. So as we come down, one thing you're going to notice, you make a good transition. The arms are working really hard to get back in front of the body, and so that's why they're kind of flashing from the top. Your hands and arms are really moving faster than the rest of your body. And so what happens here is you're trying to get them back in front of your body feverishly, but you just can't, because they were too far behind you at the top. Notice that you have this pretty big space, and again, we're speaking relative terms because you're such a good player. You have this big space where you can see between your right arm and your right side of your torso here. And I'm going to walk Tiger down through it. You'll notice his arms, now granted this is a super slow motion video, but he looks a little bit more relaxed and calm as his arms are slowly working back down in front of his body, because he's not trying to work them horizontally back in front of his body. He was working them vertically, because they didn't get as far behind at the top of his swing as you did. And so it's much easier to get those arms back in front of the body, which is critical to fix the problem where you're coming a little bit too far from the inside. Because right now your arms are just a little stuck behind your body. Your chest is unwinding a little bit early. We're going to see that just a little bit more in just a second. But your chest, again, is kind of pointing out here, and your hand's a little behind. So as we walk Tiger down, notice now his shoulders are still shut, and by this about the same point in the swing, we're close, his hands are back in front of his body, and now he can come down on top of the ball and come down on plane rather than coming in a little bit from underneath. The other thing that you'll notice, and I didn't mention this at setup and I should have, is that your stance is just a hair too wide for how wide your hips are, and so you're just a little bit outside of neutral here, where you can see Tiger's hip socket he's actually, maybe depending on the camera angle here, is a little bit out in front, or actually got his hip, the center of his hip socket right over his left ankle, so he can rotate. It's pretty close there, but you notice that there's not nearly as much of the left side of your leg on this line as you can see at Tiger's. He's moved his hips over that ball, which again is helping him come down a lot more on top of it, but more importantly, it's safer for your hip to rotate in this position. So again, as we're working back through here, One thing you're going to notice in these just couple little frames, and I'm going to draw your attention. Let me clear out some of these lines. I'm going to draw your attention to your shoulder here. So pay attention to how much in one frame your left shoulder is moving. You see that? Now I'm going to get Tiger down the same spot, clear out those lines there, and draw your attention to the same spot. His shoulder is barely moving. So in other words, you're unwinding with your torso, and he's simply taking everything around. His torso is really turned as far as it's going to go. His arms are really, it's turned as far as they're going to go at this point. The golf swing is obviously going to continue to unwind. But now those arms are back down over his front of his body, everything kind of slows down and the club releases. And that's how you get maximum speed without maximum effort. So rather than you continue to really work that body and those shoulders up and out of the way to clear room for the club, he's letting physics take over and letting the hands and everything, the club, release at this point, rather than trying to rip his shoulders around. And again, this has to do with everything that we set up from the beginning, keeping his arms in front of his body and so on and so forth. But you're going to notice that when you're really pulling that left shoulder hard out of the way, this is what happens. The harder you move from this part of your body in the downswing, the harder it is for your arms to get back in front of your body. So at this point, your shoulders have moved relatively almost more than your hands. And now that's not really possible because they don't move that far, but it's a perception that your left shoulder is really ripping hard out of the downswing here, rather than taking your right arm and pulling down back in front of your body. And that's what you need to do. We'll work on that on another lesson, but that's what you're going to start to feel. It's kind of like a baseball player throwing a ball with their right arm. You've got to get that right arm back in front of your body using your right chest muscles rather than just unwinding with your upper torso, because that's what leaves the arms and hands and clubs stuck back behind you. So that's a lot of information for this first little lesson, but that's something I'm going to have you start to monitor as we go through. Now in the next one, I'm going to have you take a look at the down the line view. Again, I'll use Tiger here as an example. And what you're going to see is much of the same things. At this point, your hands and arm and club have moved a little bit more than your hands, or excuse me, more than your chest. And what you'll notice is that that's always going to force that right arm to start to bend early because it doesn't have anywhere else to go. So if we turned our torso exclusively, rather than just swinging our arms, we'd have a nice big chest turn here, and that right arm still allowed to remain straight, which again helps keep the club in front of the body. So that's again stuff we talked about from the face-on view. And then here we can see that right arm starting to fold quite a bit. You'll notice Tiger's able to maintain the club in his hands a lot more in front of his chest here, using shoulder elevation rather than just swinging his arms around his body. So at the same point, the swing has got a lot less flexion in that right elbow, which is a good thing. So as you continue to go, this is where you get your arms and hands a little deep, and this is where we're stuck. And this is what we're going to see on the downswing, is that the arms and hands and club and everything comes a little bit underneath, and that's where we're stuck, and we're going to have to flip it a little bit, and we're going to hit a little right to left shot or a little block. You'll notice at the same point, now Tiger's made a much bigger turn, but his right arm is really close to his body. And notice that it's kind of hard to see this here, but you can see that your left arm's a little bit lower underneath your shoulder plane here. And that's just indicative that you've pushed that left arm across your body, and your hands are a little bit too far behind your chest. So if we just kind of drew a line, vertical line here, in relation to your body, your hands are a lot further behind